All right. What y'all think about this book? Overall impression.
Amazing.
Yep.
Did you like it?
Very brilliant, very original thoughts and language and imagery.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really liked it a lot. So this book came out in April of 2020, probably the worst time for any book to ever come out. But it was still longlisted for the National Book Award for 2020. And it won I think it didn't win anything, but it was nominated for several things. But I really thought it was a great book. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
I read it all at one time on a plane, and I recommend doing that way. And I said I'm going to underline something on every poem. I'm going to pick out, and that was a good way to do it. It's a real luxury, and you can read something in one sitting instead of in pieces. Makes a difference.
Yeah, I bet that was interesting. So the cover, because I always like to talk about the cover, is her picture listed like in almost like newspaper print over and over in an obituary page. Which I thought was just really a brilliant cover for this book. And it's actually one of the poems that's repeated the words on that. Did y'all like that? Do you think that was effective?
Yes.
Oh yeah. And it's a design kind of thing here, but being able to touch this and feel the
Embossed.
the embossed, or is it imprinted into the page? Is it kind of like a letterpress, or is it raised?
It's raised.
That must be the more
Okay.
expensive edition. I found that in a bookstore and I felt that and I said, wait a minute, I don't think my edition's got that. And indeed mine is flat.
Really?
It's like the equivalent of the hardcover copy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh,
That's really interesting. Huh.
Yeah. I was much miffed that I didn't have the fancy tactile version.
yeah, I love that. I love that kind of design feature.
Well, if you can't get it at Copper Canyon, where can you get it?
Right.
Well, one of her other books, The Boss. I've got. I actually didn't bring them over here, but I've got. I think 2 or 3 of her other books. I don't have Barbie Chang. I have The Boss, Sylvania Molesta, and Circle. But I think it's The Boss that was. It's a hardback. Sweeney's. No, McSweeney's. Now that I'm thinking of it, I may have to go over there on my bookshelf and get it. But just beautiful design. I love these kinds of books that are wonderful to hold.
Yeah.
Well, what do we want to do? How are we going to approach this? This is hard to kind of get around, isn't it?
It is. There are no titles, and all the column poems, they begin with something or someone who died.
Yeah.
Or something. Well,
Something.
the thing that struck me as a little bit curious is this great grief for her mother, but she doesn't reminisce about, she mentions when she was not, the last time she held her mother's hand, she was 9 years old. And, so there aren't all these examples of great affection or lessons taught, but there is this great grief.
Yeah, but don't you think that's part of the grieving, because she didn't have that relationship that she longed for with her mother?
Yes.
And that she she wants to have with her children, like that, loving her children, and that she didn't
Right.
perhaps have a great example of parental love for herself. I feel
Yeah.
that conflict through the whole thing, that her parents obviously fought a lot. It references that many times. Her mother and father fought, and that she wasn't particularly close. Her father apparently never said "I love you" until he was after the stroke.
Yeah.
Right, one of the parents said that. So I think that's a lot of the grief process of, I didn't have the relationship with my parents that I wanted to have.
Mhm.
Well, that and coupled with the grief of the parents, both really, you have the short little poems that often start with my children, as the counter to that, and the hope. I mean, the way the book ends, just like, kind of took my breath away, with ending with the hope that she didn't want the poem to end. I thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all the poems are shaped like obituaries,
Mhm.
with
Yeah.
that left and right justification in those little newspaper-esque columns,
Columns, yeah.
prosy, saying that whatever died, whether it be a thing or a person or a experience or whatever, and then oftentimes the date. I don't know, I thought it was just really inventive, and like we talk about, when someone dies, you might write an elegy, right? But these are, I don't know, a different level than that, or I don't know. I just thought this was so well done, and so, I don't know, inventive and original.
Original.
I really,
Yes.
really liked it. I really liked
Yep.
the approach.
Very original.
But then she has that 12-page fractured poem.
Right. What did you think about that?
It wore me out.
It didn't seem to fit, did it? It kind of took me by surprise all of a sudden, and kind of took me out of the book for a moment. It was strange.
Except that it was, more stream of consciousness. I mean, I saw, obviously it's not, because the language is so rich, but it's as if things are just wafting through her brain and in response to perhaps the grief. But this part's even more original than the other.
Somebody sure loves her some Sylvia Plath.
Right.
Yeah.
She's channeling Plath, isn't she? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Well, if you think about how the book uses the columns, the kind of obituary newspaper column shape or form, that's been established in the book. And so there is that expectation or that repetition that is met page after page. And then there are these variations that come in the form of these short, I guess, tanka, and which I very much admire. That's one of my favorite aspects of this book, because I've actually tried to create a book one time myself where I had haiku that came at intervals throughout a book, or a series of haiku, not two like she has with the tanka here, but several. But there'd be a little kind of interlude of haiku throughout a book. So when I came across this, I was like, oh, I had that kind of thought or something similar to this, but it really works better for this book than it would have really for mine. So I think that the use of the tanka as a variation is really wonderful, and especially since a lot of it speaks to children.
Mhm.
And then that as we're talking about that kind of longest poem, which of course KB loves, the long poems, those are her favorites. But when we get to that part of the book of where that makes sense, you've got to do something in this to break apart or to create some variation that works against the other. So to me, it seems like a logical development that would come along. And so I actually thought it was really fascinating when I got to it. It's like taking the tight frame of the column and then just, breaking it apart.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe that's what is done. I didn't try to see if I could smash it all back in and it would fit like a column.
Yeah. I did find it difficult to read that middle section, but to me, it was like she continued to talk about the death of language through the first part. And then the second part is language expanded and exploded almost. It's like she's recapturing language or grasping for language. Because her father had a stroke and then was not able to communicate. So I think there's a thing about grasping for understanding and words and I don't know. To me, it really fit too. It was a nice little interruption from
Yeah, it had
the
some
fairies.
breathing space in it.
Yeah, although I found it very difficult to read.
Yes.
And the Tonkas I found absolutely beautiful, because that to me was, so we're all this death and then suddenly there's life. It's like, I want to see the living, the life of my children. And it goes back to being a parent and loving your children more than life itself. It's just really interesting. So much about this book I just really enjoyed.
Yes.
On page 32, looking at those Tonka, I love that first one. Sometimes all I have are words, and to write them means they are no longer prayers, but are now animals. Other people can hunt them. I stopped when I read that. I didn't even go on to read the next one. I thought, wow, that's such a wonderful statement. And here we are. I mean, we're the readers. We're hunting the words in a way.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Sandy with the reach for language, the loss of language, that kind of stuff. There's much of that as a kind of theme throughout the book.
Yeah.
Language is. Oh, and I thought one of the. Of course, I'm probably anybody of my age generation, I guess, is a huge Tomas Tranströmer fan. So, and Tranströmer is someone who I think also suffered a stroke, and that loss of language was part of that for him. So, there's page 30 was the poem about him, which I thought was just a great addition to the book. And Kathleen, you said that you read the book kind of in one sitting. Did you read it? I'm curious. Did you read it straight through, or did you use the table of contents and go, ooh, similes?
No, I read it straight through.
Okay. I was just curious about that.
It's interesting too, because it's not written in order. I mean, it flips through time back and forth, 2009, 2015. And imagine if you're really studying the book, you'd spend a little time stringing that all together with the dates.
Right.
It wasn't that long of a plane ride.
Yeah.
Well, the 2009,
Also,
we know, right, was the father's stroke, June
Yep.
24th, 2009. August 3rd, 2015 was a mother's death. So those two dates reappear
Right.
over and over and over again. Because things changed on those dates. Many things
Mhm.
died on those dates, not just the frontal
As-
lobe or the mother.
Right.
As OCD as I am, it did not bother me about the dates being different until pages 35 and 36, when the appetite, there's an obituary for the appetite on both of those.
Mhm.
And the appetite died June 21st, 2015. And then on the very next page, appetite died on March 16th, 2015. And it really, really bothers me that those are not flipped. I'm like, why? Why would you put the June one before the March one? And it's just, this is why I'm not a great creative brain, because I would have completely done, chronologically. Although I appreciate all the other ones, it's just because it's the same, it's the same appetite. It's appetite.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
She mentions her husband once. She mentions her children constantly, as she sounds like a single parent until she does mention her husband once, her spouse.
Where is her spouse mentioned? Do you know? Off the top of your head?
I
It's-
labeled it. Give me just a minute.
in the poem about when his family died and he bawled quickly and got over it quickly and hugged her.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also one where she mentions marriage specifically, and that's the one I labeled, but it'll take me a minute. It was fairly late in the book, I think.
Yeah, I think
so
The
too.
one I'm referring to was late in the book too.
Were they at some kind of children's performance or something? I can't remember.
Where are you?
Affection on 93 is the one I was referencing.
Yeah.
Well, that one's not about the husband. That's about watching somebody else.
Yeah,
It's in the long poem in the middle. It's on 55 in my edition. The dust on the underside of the moon, it is both dust and a metaphor for marriage. Okay. I hate the lawn, the snowman, the carrot nose, the queasy smile, the end of nature. Thank you, Bill McKibben, but I know nothing.
I think that the only one is that on page 93 when she specifically mentions, when my spouse's parents died both times, he burst into tears. And that's it. The first time he hugged me and not his family. The second time he hugged no one. That's it, I think.
What page, Catherine, were you referring to with the
It's
marriage?
in the long poem, the middle poem. It's on page 55, where she says that the dust on the underside of the moon is both dust and a metaphor for marriage. Wonder what her spouse thought of that. Because
I
it is
wonder if she's
striking.
referring to her parents' marriage.
Well, perhaps so.
Lots of rain in the book.
And every time there's a lemon, it's a secret. That one took me a
Yeah.
while.
Lots of lemons.
Yeah.
In the tantras.
Just like the creativity of all the very varied places she addresses these obits to. I mean, such a wide variety of topics. all kinds of topics.
Yeah.
I liked that, I liked that she was chronicling all the stuff that dies when somebody dies, or when somebody even if they're not dead, the father's still alive. I was not wild about, I didn't really see what was so original and fresh. I read the reviews about concrete poetry, about the obituary gimmick. There were places where I felt she was being sort of willfully obscure and wringing language too hard. But what redeemed it for me was all the material about everything that dies that you don't think of when somebody dies. And I believe that. I'm sure she is right that you lose all these things you never thought of losing. And all those caesuras in the middle, I think caesuras are like profanity. You overuse them and they lose their oomph. And for me, those had lost their oomph by the second or third page.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. I thought that went on way too long. Because I actually, after 3 or 4 pages, I was like, okay, let's just like flip some
Look,
pages
more
here.
caesuras.
It was just very difficult to read. And at some point you're like, I don't know if I can read any more of this.
Yeah.
I also wonder how old the children are now. When are they going to read this?
Yeah. Did it say she was, so in 2011, she was 41. So she's 51 now.
I just like on page 75, grief isn't what spills out of a cracked egg. Grief is the row of eggs waiting in the cold to lose their shape. Just real unusual.
So what do you take that to mean? How do eggs lose their shape in the cold?
Well, they're maybe thinking about when they're cracked.
Yeah.
They're waiting in the cold. They're imagining being what spills out of the crack. In other words, dreading death is worse than dying.
Yeah.
And she says that about her mother. Her mother knew she was dying, but in the end, she had no idea.
But she also says, that death isn't the enemy, it's the knowledge of death.
Yeah.
So page 66.
So which one?
Well, that statement that the knowledge of death is the eggs waiting in the cold to lose their shape. That's we all think it's the cracking of something that's the worst part, but it's the waiting for the cracking. is the worst part.
Yeah, the dread.
And knowing it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Knowledge of death is the enemy.
Right.
I thought it was interesting that since that quote is from page 66, it's the obituary writer can die before the subject.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a very nice moment, I thought, where her father's still alive and she's writing these obituaries, but there is absolutely no guarantee that she's going to live beyond him. One of the sort of matters or concerns of the elegy is kind of how you come to terms with you're dead and I'm alive. But yeah, no guarantee. She could get hit by a semi tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then there are like on page 96. Then we go, I guess, into the future. The bees, 268 million years old from the Philippines, passed away on April 26, 2217 in Nome, Alaska. So kind of all the way into another century. And then maybe, well, how would you get out of this? I mean, once you've started this, like, how would you get out of this book, right? Of course, the way we talked about those tanka that she uses, but it's the very last one in the fourth section, America. Oh yeah, okay. America died on February 14th, 2018.
What happened then?
That's the Parkland, Florida school shooting.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
There's just so many dates she could have put in here.
She
Possibilities.
has another one earlier. Where is it? It's basically the inauguration of Trump, but where I labeled it, I had to label a lot of things. Where are you? Ah, yes. Empathy. This is on 65. Empathy died sometime before January 20th, 2017,
Yeah.
which I took to be Trump.
Inauguration day, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, ending on Parkland was nice. It's one of those moments where the private death becomes the public death. That's one way out, is to kind of open out the parameters a little bit.
And then the dead mother is conversing with these children.
Yeah.
I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And lovely too, in a way, touching their hair, how she might tickle their knees to make them laugh.
Very nice. Yeah. I did not see that one coming, and I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I don't remember where it was, but talking about her mother's death, she said out of 6 siblings, only the uncle came. Some of the others called, and she realized that people had found her mother as difficult as she found her mother. But
there's a lot of not touching in this book. I mean, she says when her sister comes to the funeral, she doesn't touch her or hug her. It's a not a dysfunctional family, but a not knit together family. Not affectionate.
That's probably the only time she mentions a sibling of having a sister too. Like that's the same poem she mentions the husband in.
Right. It's definitely just like she's put herself in the middle between her 2 children and her 2 parents. And she's the pivoter, and no one else is really involved in the book except very marginally.
Do you guys almost sense a fear to love her children so much? Because then, I mean, in the last on 105, I am ready to admit I love my children.
Yeah.
To admit this,
Yeah.
admit that they will die. So the whole book is coming to this recollection of, yes, you can love someone wholeheartedly and fully, even though they are going to die at some point. And knowing that the relationship with her mother was not a close one, and maybe there was a longing there for a mother-daughter love that never was realized, but that she could love her children. And coming right after the Parkland, Florida poem, where these children have died from violence, and now I am ready to admit I love my children. That's just quite a beautiful thing. I really enjoyed that. And then hope, hope, hope. See how the mouth stays open at the very last. I thought that was beautiful.
It's like everybody's holds everybody at arm's length in the book. And then at the end, she opens her arms.
Right, yeah.
You know, one of the things I noticed was most of the, or almost all of the entries begin identically with some variations. And if you look at the first three, you've got died unpeacefully. That's on page 5. Died unpeacefully, page 6. Died unknowingly, page 7. Died unwillingly, page 8. And then the next one is she moves away from those adverbs. And then you get straightforward, well, maybe like a little variation on page 10, language died brilliant and beautiful. So that little variation. But by the time we get to page 16, then we get began their dying. So my mother's lungs began their dying sometime in the past. There are a couple of places along the way, but then when you get to page 72, blame wants to die but cannot. And then I love this one on page 80. Obsession, born on January 20th, 1940, never died after the stroke, but grew instead. So I kind of find myself looking at the variations of this structure. You know, hindsight never existed on page 87 until August 3rd, 2015. There was another one a little farther on. Well, we mentioned the bees already. Oh, guilt on page 99 never died on August 3rd, 2017. So those variations I thought were really interesting, and in a way I almost kind of wished for a few more sprinkled, especially on the front part of the book. Just an observation.
I was about to make that observation too, so I'm glad you did.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the difficulty in doing something like this. You know, once you establish some kind of predictability, maybe not that I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but you establish something that is routine and predictable.
Yeah.
How much can you do before you have to throw in some variation, or how often throw in a variation? I mean, like for instance, I don't think there. I mean, the book begins with those unknowingly, unpeacefully, all those adverbs that are, but I don't think they come anymore, unless I'm overlooking or misremembering.
I think they would have gotten a little tedious if she had. I mean, I do like it in the beginning, but you know, you only have so many adjectives and adverbs.
But that, you know, that's both that's an expectation, because okay, now we're getting these adverbs,
Right.
and then
Right.
okay, she changes and shifts into something else. But it might have been interesting later at some other point to come back to another one of those adverbs that's a real surprise. Oh, I didn't, you know, oh, this echoes back to the beginning, but I didn't see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Or resume them near the end. On page 16, I thought it was poignant when she said her mother died at 7:07 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It is 3 hours earlier in Hawaii. Does that mean in Hawaii she hasn't died yet?
Yeah.
But the plane ride to Hawaii is 5 hours long. This time gap can never be overcome. The difference is called grieving. Reminded me when my daughter found out there was no Santa Claus and she wept and wailed for hours. And she said, I wish today were yesterday and I didn't know this.
Oh.
It's what made me think of that.
The things that struck me most were at the ends, and they tended to be sentences you could almost pull out like sententia. For instance, on 94, when she's saying home died sometime around 1960 when my mother left Taiwan, that was the beginning. And then she says home died again on August the 3rd, 2015. But at the very end, she says, even with my eyes closed, I know a bird passes over me. In Hangman, the body forms while it's being hung, as in we grow as we are dying.
Yeah, that was interesting.
And there were so many that I marked that hit me like that. Where it was just something on 61, where she was talking about friendship died a slow death after August the 3rd, 2015. It ends, do the leaves care about the swelling of the fruit? Does the fruit consider the leaves while it expands? Maybe the leaves shade the fruit as it grows, and the fruit emits fragrance for the leaves. But eventually, each must face its own falling alone. Yeah.
I liked that one too.
For fruit, and I've spent so far this fall looking at the leaves swirl around and fall. Oh, it just, I can't put it in words exactly, but the ends made me, I like the ends. The beginnings with what died were very difficult. And at the end, sometimes she was pessimistic, but sometimes she wasn't.
They seem like nice little aphorisms, like on page 20. And she just takes something from the beginning and brings it back to the end. Like on page 20, it's true, the grieving speak a different language. But then at the end, an image of me sits down. Depression is a glove over the heart. Depression is an image of a glove over the image of a heart.
Yes.
So you think about that, and it's like, wow, that's really neat. So that one you have to think about a little bit more. But on page 23, which is probably one of my favorites.
I like this one too.
At what point does a raindrop accept its falling? She asks 3 lines in, and then the last line, the last sentence is, to acknowledge death is to acknowledge that we must take another shape.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
I have almost all of my endings marked too, Alice. So.
I do too, Alice. I 100% agree with you.
We assume all tears taste the same, the way our sadness is plural, but grief is singular. Page 27.
I was not really sure what she meant by that distinction. How is it actually different, sadness from grief? I mean, are we talking about kind of communal feeling versus private? Sure, but what actually makes the difference there?
I think you can be sad in a group, maybe. You can, you can feel the sadness, but I think you have to grieve. Everybody's going to grieve in their own way.
Yeah. I think on page 86, she says, grief is wearing a dead person's dress forever. And that struck me. I also have two more favorite endings. One on 97. Anger after someone has died is a cake on a table, fully risen, a knife housed in glass. And then on 104, the dead are an image of wind. And when they comb their hair, our trees rustle.
I loved that one.
Just beautiful. Yeah. She has so many unusual images, the way she describes them. I have never heard many of those. Yeah. I mean, there is no cliche in her book, I don't think.
Right.
And unusual similes too. She was
Yeah.
really good at coming up with unusual things that you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
But that
Oh,
also
some of
make you,
those so obscure though. I mean, a knife housed in glass. What are we talking about there? What's the actual
Yeah.
vehicle of this simile? I have no idea. I got nothing.
I thought it
Well-
was, you know how you have a cake plate with the glass dome over it, and the knife was in there to cut the cake. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's more than I had before. Thank you.
And this poem, you know, is referencing anger too, like that she's the raw emotion of she's angry towards her mother. She feels anger towards her mother.
Right.
And I think what she's doing is turning it into love for her children. I mean, she has these regrets about her relationship with her mother, and then maybe she thinks, well, I don't want to have this sort of relationship with my children, so I'm going to turn toward them.
So is that why the knife is in the glass? I mean, is it to keep the
Well-
knife from cutting the kids or what?
Well,
are
I
you going to
think-
lift the glass and take the knife and cut the anger?
yeah.
And cut the cake.
Which is sweet like cake.
Yeah.
I mean,
When we are angry,
I was really baffled.
yeah,
Yeah.
when we are angry, it's best the knife is housed in glass because we may cut someone. Yeah.
But also to enjoy the cake, you have to cut it. To eat
Sure.
the cake, I mean, you don't have to, but it's a civilized thing to do. But yeah.
Well, maybe from Transtromer, she's, you know, he's really good with images. Maybe that's kind of rubbed off in some ways with all the images as you talked about. You know, he even talks about grief. What does he say in one of his poems? So difficult for the butterfly to tow the barge. And it's like, that's a great way of talking about grief. You know, what a really fascinating image to me. My father was a towboat pilot on the Mississippi River, so you know, just the premise that a butterfly might be tied to one of those barges pulling it. Well, that's what grief is. It feels like that. But,
Yeah.
I've always loved that image. You know, one thing we haven't talked about, not that we have to, but you know, the book does have several epigraphs that are spaced out through the book. And you know, and of course, choosing those or trying to place an epigraph before even a collection, or in this case, the sections of a book. How do you see those operating, if at all? Or is that anything we thought about?
Well, section 3 for sure, because Eliot's last year's words belong to last year's language, let's put away what I've been thinking and what I've been feeling, and next year's words await another voice. I think the last part, I enjoyed the section 3 more.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it just seemed more hopeful, or there just seemed to be more images that I liked perhaps, but now it seems like she's turning to something else with that epigraph anyway.
Maybe she's giving a hint, a little clue, for section 4, when she has the Virginia Woolf quote, it's a hopeful one. The canopy of civilization is burnt out, but there's a stir of some sort. Sparrows on plane trees somewhere chirping. And she ends the book with hope.
And then of course the Sylvia Plath, somebody mentioned her channeling that for section 2, which was, the nick and the candlestick and the minor. That definitely goes with let the stars plummet to their dark address. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, those Plath poems about the son Nicholas, they're and she seems to love him to death, but they are dark poems. The kid's all crazy about the balloons, and then the balloon bursts and he has a red shred in his fist, and they're bleak poems.
Yeah, and section 1, she's allowing herself to give sorrow words. So yeah, I don't think I paid attention to it necessarily, other than, oh, I like that quote, or, oh yeah, I remember that, but I didn't necessarily put it together with that section, so I'm glad you pointed that out.
Well, if you can go from Macbeth to 4 quartets, you're doing okay. Better than the other way around.
Yeah.
I always like it when there is some movement toward change, or change for the better, or some form of hope. Without that, you're not quite sure what the book wants you to do. Just go home and kill yourself or what.
Yeah, I wondered about that last epigraph for section 4. I know you mentioned that, Kathleen, but the first line of that canopy of civilization is burnt out. I mean, that doesn't seem all that hopeful.
But it moves to hope in
Yeah.
the little epigraph.
But there is a kindling in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. A stir of some sort.
Well, and even though that's in the last section, I don't know, maybe I felt a little bit about that in the poem on page 12 with language dying. I really thought that was beautifully creative. The night person had a name, but she was like a ghost who left letters on my lips. And the chart read, couldn't breathe, 2:33, screaming, 3:30, calm, 4:24. And she was writing into the language she understood, breathing, unfolding, instead of couldn't breathe. Instead of screaming, breathing in blades. And I thought, wow, what a great image. And instead of calm, breathing like an evening gown. What beautiful images to describe breathing.
The ending on that one is a bit of a puzzle, how the skin responds to a wedding dress in the same way it responds to rain. Sounds good, but I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, shouldn't it just slip on?
I don't know.
Rain slips on your skin like, I mean, if you got a silk wedding dress, it would slip on.
Or there's a sense of marriage.
Or your skin perceives both of them.
Mhm.
Maybe not the same way in the way you look at it, but the skin's still doing the perceiving.
Mhm. Right, that's true.
It would be hard to write these obits about yourself, and she does that several times. That's on the borderline of uncomfortable to think about.
Yeah, and she dies a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I get that for sure, but to do the act of writing your own obit, I guess she's in the groove though, so.
Isn't that an old? I mean, that's an exercise. I know. I don't know what this says, but I've done this in one of my classes probably 25 years ago. One of my colleagues, not even in our department, but just somebody who worked on our campus, gave me this idea, and he gave me an example, like writing his own obituary. And so we did this one time in one of my classes. It was actually very enlightening.
Oh, really? I
In a
bet
very
that-
odd way. You might think people would find this morbid, but it actually turned out not to be. It was almost celebratory.
Right, the summation. Well, the opposite is an interesting thing to do too, where you take obituaries and hand them out and say, write a story about this person in the obituary.
But on the one that's on page 13, what I thought was my friend Kay, whose mother had Alzheimer's, would go and take her mom to the gym and they would do things together. And she said that her mother was very happy, but her mother didn't know who she was. Her mother thought that Kay was actually her aunt, her mother's sibling. And yeah, they looked alike. But, you know, on the one hand, and I thought this was the same thing, where her father calls her over thinking that she's her mother. And she says, what happens when the shadow is attached to the wrong object, but refuses to let go? And that's what I thought had happened. I thought that was why she was saying that she died on June the 24th, 2011. Oh, she said, I walked over because I wanted to believe him.
Well, if you think of, I mean, that in a way we do die, or some part of us dies with that day or that event or that situation. And, like on page 97, I mean, she even says Victoria Chang died on August 3rd, 2015, the one who never used to weep when other people's parents died. So that one, I mean, and we're all, I mean, Whitman already told us, we're like multitudes. So there are so many versions of us, and essentially every day we die and every day we're born. some version in both cases. Tomorrow there'll be a version of me that will not have borrowed one of my, I think my daughter's cups. It's like a sippy cup. I plan to grow up one day.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
You could put scotch in that cup.
Did anybody have any favorites that you want to talk about? Any particular ones that you really liked?
Not so much a favorite poem as just favorites, lots of favorite sentences.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I do like the one on page 61, friendships died a slow death after August 3rd, 2015. The friends visited my father. They sat in chairs and spoke Chinese, wore dictionaries for coats. Strange looks between spouses. The friends went home feeling good that they had done their duty, picked up odds and ends of words. Each had memories of offices, of seeing the other side of the sun. The visits lessened and lessened. They were being pursued by their own deaths. I wonder about the leaves and their relationship with fruit. Do the leaves care about the swelling of the fruit? Does the fruit consider the leaves while it expands? Maybe the leaves shade the fruit as it grows, and the fruit emits fragrance for the leaves. But eventually, each must face its own falling alone. I think perhaps that has touched me mostly because I've always been a little bit envious of people who had siblings, thinking, oh, well, they've got people to help them take care of their parents, or they've got somebody to talk with about things as they grow older. And of course, I hear from a lot of people that you don't always get along with your siblings, so it's not a guaranteed thing that you have a good relationship. But I guess I think, oh, well, everybody's got to face this alone anyway. You know, there are things in life that it doesn't matter whether you've got parents who care about you or not, or siblings who care about you or not. You're going to have to face it yourself. And just her pointing that out, I guess, at the end, it's like, oh, that's right. We've all got to do this alone. Everybody has to do this alone. We've all got to come to terms with things ourselves, for ourselves.
I liked Secrets on 33. Secrets died on August 7th, 2015, and they were relieved to die. No one at the funeral had known about my mother's illness. No one had known how fiercely my mother and father fought, one Chinese face after another. I told the story, told it again, their mouths opened like time. Red sashes with Chinese characters I couldn't read. The stems spoke with their flowers, to look down and see their legs missing. Later, I found a photo of my mother smiling with friends at her home just the year before. No oxygen tank, no tubes in her nose. She must have taken it off, put it in the closet between the beginning of her life and the end of her life. I imagined her panicking inside, waiting for them to leave. And that, I can totally picture someone doing that, but what an awful thing to feel you have to do. This mind and speech assemble and disassemble like geese. And that took me a minute, but I pictured kind of skeins of geese in the sky. Scientists now say that a mind still works after the body has died, that there's a burst of brain energy, that maybe she heard the geese above disassemble one last time. Then maybe my kiss on her cheek felt like lightning. And she kind of lost me there. I'm not sure where the lightning comes in after the geese are disassembling, but I liked the idea that it's the secrets that die and they're relieved to die. And it would just be so great to know that you could die taking your secrets with you and nobody was ever going to know them. But here the daughter has figured it out and now everybody knows it. That she would take off her oxygen tank for a social event.
Catherine, I thought the ending of that was a reference back to then there's a burst of brain energy. So maybe the kiss would create something that was like lightning. Like somehow the body itself responded to it, even though there may not be any real consciousness.
Maybe so.
Yeah, the
And I thought
electricity, the
maybe-
positive and negative ions of cellular energy.
Hmm.
Electricity.
And I thought she just maybe hoped the kiss would have an impact.
My favorite was the blue dress on 86. And all the questions she poses in this. It really affects me because it's talking about the cremation of the mother. When my mother died, we cremated her too. And so it was really, I remember not necessarily thinking the same things, but feeling that kind of despair. And so this one hit me. So the blue dress died on August 6, 2015, along with the little blue flowers, all silent. Once the petals looked up, now small pieces of dust. I wonder whether they burned the dress or just the body. I wonder who lifted her up into the fire. I wonder if her hair brushed his cheek before it grew into a bonfire. I wonder what sound the body made as it burned. They dyed her hair for the funeral, too black. She looked like a comic character. I waited for the next comic panel to see the speech bubble and what she might say. But her words never came, and we were left with the stillness of blown glass, the irreversibility of rain, and millions of little blue flowers. Imagination is having to live in a dead person's future. Grief is wearing a dead person's dress forever. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Anybody else have a favorite? Did you hear that?
No.
Yeah.
That was scam likely calling me.
I did notice in the acknowledgements how many of these poems have been published in so many places. I mean, it's
yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yep.
Lots of publications going on there.
Had y'all heard of this poet before this book?
No,
Yes.
I had not.
Oh, yeah, I've got several of her books. So, but I have everybody's books. So
Right. Yeah, you
You
don't
do. You totally do.
sorry.
I was unfamiliar with her, and I can't wait to read more of her books now. I'm excited about to see what else she's done different, because this is so unique and
Mhm.
it blew me away.
I remember reading about Barbie Chang, but I haven't actually read it yet. Has anybody read that one?
No, I think
Yeah.
that's the one of hers I don't have. It's more recent. And then, isn't there another book of hers that's prose? Am I remembering correctly?
Not
What
sure.
about memory or something?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it just came out, or maybe it was this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you, well, I mean, I know we buy books, but you know, then there are idiots like me who read literary journals too. And so if you're reading around and well, all the public, you know, all the places that she's publishing, right? I mean, there are lots of venues for publishing poems, and you know, if you're reading around in those journals, you're going to come across people's names and find a poem. Oh, this is interesting, and then try to find more of that person's work. That's kind of how I started 30 something years ago. How I've acquired all these books of poems.
I was struck with the long poem in the middle, I'm a Minor. Apparently she published a bunch of sections from that separately.
Mm.
But then, you know, here comes the book and they're all together.
You know, I like that. I like, I mean, we always, when you pick up a book, it'll say something like, you know, grateful acknowledgement to the, yeah, to the journals in which some of these poems appeared, sometimes in slightly different versions, you know, whatever that little thing is that we always put at the, but we all, I doubt much of it's ever changed that much. But occasionally you do encounter someone for whom the versions that were published in literary magazines turn out really just to be kind of drafts before the book, if the book is ever published.
I think
And so
it's-
separate things can be brought together.
Yeah, and it's good that they can stand on their own too.
Yeah. So her creative nonfiction is Dear Memory.
Yeah.
Letters on Writing, Silence, and Grief. And then she's written 2 children's books too.
She has to counter all the grief somehow.
I thought it was kind of cute, the poem where she writes about hiding in the bed to scare her children, making herself as flat as she can, and jumps out and scares them after they brush their teeth.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Do we have anything else we want to say about this?
I wasn't going to say anything about it, but I guess I am going to say something about it because I'm now talking. And it's totally minor, but just instead of obituary, obit.
Mhm.
You know, I guess I'm just kind of curious about
I
why
read
that
somewhere,
choice.
I read somewhere that she liked the sonics of
Sonic.
it.
Okay.
You know, that it was a bite bit, you know, that it was, that in itself had some meaning for her.
And she's gone away. Or he's gone away.
What do you mean, Alice? What does that mean?
Oh, it's Latin,
Oh,
obit.
Oh, okay. Well, now I'm glad I asked the question.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's what journalists call it, you know, in newspaper rooms. And yeah, I could see, you know, it seems to kind of emphasize the shortness, choppiness, boxiness of the genre.
Okay.
But you know, when I really like something, I want to come back and reread it and reread it and reread it for pleasure. And this was more of an intellectual exercise for me. It was not pleasure. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know exactly why. I really don't. Oh, there were sentences where I wanted to pull out sentences and sections where I thought, I'd like to write that down and just come back to that. But I didn't feel drawn to the book I admired it, but I didn't love it. Is that and that's an odd feeling.
Well, the content is just difficult. I lost my mother about 3 years ago from dementia. So for me, the content was it's still ripe. So it was difficult to read in that respect. And yeah, I see what you mean. It's probably not a book I'm going to want to often come to cruise for pleasure. It's more of a book that when I'm feeling certain feelings, I might look to it for some enlightenment and comfort. But yeah, it's not really a pleasure read.
Yeah, I've been lucky. My parents are still alive and pretty much compost, and I have a feeling I'll have a different take on this after.
Yeah.
Well, you do raise an interesting question, Alice, about the ways in which we do read. I mean, I think about, say, someone like Wallace Stevens, who I read and I admire, and I probably have read the most literary criticism about Wallace Stevens. But that affection for, or that kind of bringing him close to me in the way that I might do with William Carlos Williams, it's not the same. I feel emotionally closer to Williams than I do, even though I think maybe Stevens is the better poet. But I'm not in love in the way, and maybe it doesn't have to be an either or. I mean, I still read both of these poets, as I do read a lot of, you take, say, someone like Bill Brown. We all know Bill Brown. We're very drawn to his work. Sometimes there's intimacy and a feeling that we have when we read it. And then maybe there's somebody else that we read and they're kind of, we stand back from them, but we're not close. I don't know. I think we're trying to hit around something here, which is fundamental to the ways in which we do read.
And our experiences, I'm sure, bring a lot into it, because I know exactly how you feel, Alice, but I was feeling that about the last book that we read. That was the
Talking about Carolyn Forshay's.
Oh no, it wasn't her. It was the one where Korean or Vietnamese, the girl who was writing about her grandmother, about her mother, about herself.
Ji Young Young.
Yeah, that's the one. I was like, there's a lot of beautiful language here and very heartbreaking story. And I was like, and it's not moving me. It's not, but I think it's just where we are at the time, because I would be willing to bet that, in another year, if both of us come back to each of those books, we'll feel differently. So.
Yeah.
I think some poets' work triggers you to write, and that's the best connection of all. In some poets you can read their poetry and appreciate, but it doesn't trigger you to sit down.
Right, sure.
And I think some show more warmth, like Williams shows that warmth, and Stevens is more detached in a lot of his poems.
I have always loved Stevens.
I love
And
Williams.
most of the time, I don't necessarily understand him, but it's like listening to beautiful music. And so it replays in my mind again and again in different situations. And slowly it comes to different meanings over the decades. You know, Williams I admire, but I don't love.
See, yeah, we're the opposite of each other. Although I love you.
I love you too. And I still think you wrote that poem about books for me.
Well, yeah, I guess what we're getting at is this idea that sometimes a book or poems they're well made, and there's something that we admire in the craft part of it, but somehow we're still not going over to that side in some sense. And then there are, I think about like a poet like William Stafford, whom I teach, and I feel very drawn to and intimate with Stafford's work. But maybe someone like Charles Wright, I admire his work deeply, but I don't have the same feeling as I do when I'm reading William Stafford. They're just two different reading experiences. And even
So
among
what
all
do you think you will ultimately feel about this one?
Ooh, interesting. I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know if you're asking me, Alice, or all of us.
She was asking you.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna turn off my camera here.
Sandy, that sounds like you're dodging it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that I appreciate about this book, at least, is the thinking about these ideas and concepts, obsession or simile or friendship, the ways in which I might now be given to looking at all the things of my life and every word I'm going to come across in a book, right? It's going to prompt in me this idea that it too dies. I mean, the word propaganda died. It used to mean, spreading the gospel, and now it died, but it became something else. And so every word is doing that, and I might be more cognizant. So in that way, it's reading a book like this becomes practical. In the way that one of my thoughts as I read this book was, Claudia Emerson, whom some of us knew. Claudia, in one of her books, has these pre-elegies. She wrote, it's a really kind of fascinating idea. I think it's in figure studies. I think it's in that particular book, but pre-elegies, thinking about things that are passing away before they have passed away. That's not a bad thing for any of us to think about, and this book does this. But it also kind of maybe takes each of us into our own family, whatever dimension or qualities of that family, and just invites us to think about our own family situations and dynamics in the ways that she has in this book, at least, as one thread of it. A good question, Alice. Now I want to think about it.
Because that's really one of the things I kept thinking about with this. Oh, KB, the poem that you said was your favorite, that was the one where I loved the ending and wanted to keep thinking about that. But there were lots of other places, mostly toward the ends of things, where I did want to keep thinking. I think most of the time when I'm reading poetry, I'm feeling,
Hmm.
and then that's a different way of knowing
Yeah.
from intellectually thinking. Anyway, that's what happened for me for the book.
No,
You know,
Alice,
Alice,
I
It's
think
kind
you're
of weird.
You're
okay.
100% right. 100% right, Alice, because for me, the feeling part of this book, so my mom died in January 2020. And it was very fresh, like the topics in this book, to think about what has died beyond just her body, but all the little grievings that you do as you look at her things, or you deal with the different parts of dying that is beyond the body dying. So it was very fresh for me because it was more feeling than actually just like head reading. It was heart reading or heart understanding.
Isn't there, I forget what poet says, not, maybe it's a Russian poet, not people die, but worlds die in them. This is 20-something years ago. I'm forgetting now who said that. But that's maybe one part of what we're seeing in this book, is that in addition to the people who die, all these worlds, which includes a chair or
Yeah.
a dress or whatever. Alice, something you said reminded me of, on page 63, there's a poem, it begins, subject matter always dies. What we are left with is architecture, form, sound, all in a room, darkened, a few chairs unarranged. The door is locked from the inside, but still, subject matter breaks in and all the others rise. My mother's death is not her story. My father's stroke is not his story. I am not my mother's story, not my father's story. But there is a meeting place that is hidden, one that holds all the maps toward indifference. Can pain be separated from subject matter? Can subject matter take flight and lose its way, peck on another tree? How do you walk heavily with subject matter on your back without trampling all the meadows?
Thank you.
The whole idea of questions that are throughout the book. She uses questions very well.
Rules are cruel, the game nightmarish. Yeah.
Jeff, that line is the end of this poem.
Yeah, I see that, KB. Thanks.
I can't imagine why you didn't remember the name of the author.
What
That should have just rolled trippingly off the tongue.
was it? My friend Victoria Clausey one time said I was a walking Google. Yeah, it isn't people, but whole worlds that perish. Yeah. Well, this has been good. I appreciate you guys thinking through this book and giving us some things to consider.
What's next? I've forgotten. Who's
Well,
next?
Red Rover.
we actually, did we decide we were skipping December?
Probably a good idea.
I think we did. Because it's getting too close. The third Tuesday is close to Christmas. So we're going to let you read Red Rover by Bob Hickok by yourself.
Okay.
We might, we can always put some stuff in the Facebook group, right?
Yeah.
Maybe start a conversation there.
Yeah.
And maybe do it that way.
Yeah. And then we'll jump back in January with some new poets, new books.
Sounds good.
Are y'all
Do we
sticking
have-
with us? Are y'all
Do we
sticking
have the
with
new
us?
books yet?
We're still discussing. We're getting,
We have
we
a
have
kind
a
of tentative
list.
list.
Yeah. We'll make that known though pretty soon.
There's never a shortage of books being published.
Right, that's right.
And you know, like we said earlier, we were trying to, you know, have a mixture of. We don't want all the books to be chosen from Copper Canyon, so we we can, which is easy to do, right? Or Gray Wolf or something, but we do want to have a mixture of some smaller presses and poets that might not have as much of a national exposure. Some of those have been wonderful anyway that we've done. So
Don't you both have new books that we could talk about?
but we decided a long time ago we tried not to do any of that. Well, because a lot of people who are in the group have books, and we'd all just be doing our own books all the time. KB's got a book. Sandy's got a new book. I'm sure Linda Parsons will have a book. Catherine's got a new book. so we would just spend all of our time with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we want to grow. We don't want to be
Incestuous.
sucking in the-
Let's write an obituary for incest there.
I'm going to go ahead and write an obit for my forthcoming book in April. I think it's dead on arrival. It's dead. And all of my books, mine's going to be called DOA.
Hopefully not.
I hope not.
How do you gently nag your publisher? I'll need to do that with mine, but I don't have the nerve. I asked her in August and she said, I'll be working on it all September. And now it's almost December.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah. That's what happens.
Yep. That's right.
Well,
Okay. Well, good deal. I guess it'll be sometime in January before we really get back together. But as we said, we can always communicate in the Facebook group. And we'll try to do that as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Happy Thanksgiving. Merry
Happy
Christmas.
Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy
Have a
holiday.
good
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good night.